Welcome back, everyone. This time around, we're diving into Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens.
A real page-turner, that's for sure.
It is. And we've got excerpts from the book itself, of course,
Of course.
but also some insightful reviews from Goodreads.
Always love those. Gives you a real sense of how the book landed with different readers,
Exactly. And we've even got some background info on Delia Owens herself.
Fascinating. Her background is really quite something.
It is, yeah.
So, ready to get lost in the marshes of North Carolina.
Let's do it. So for anyone who maybe hasn't read the book yet, it tells the story of Kaya Clark, this young girl who's basically abandoned by her family.
Left to fend for herself in this really remote, wild area.
Yeah, and she becomes known as the Marsh Girl.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Such a haunting nickname.
It is, and it really gets at that sense of isolation that defines so much of her life.
It's not just a setting, the marsh. It's almost like a character in itself.
It really is, yeah. Owens uses the marsh to kind of shape Kaya, It provides for her, but it also, I don't know, almost teaches her.
Like a surrogate mother, almost.
Yeah, and you see that in those moments where she's like feeding the gulls on the beach all alone.
Searching for connection.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of that solitude. Yeah.
And Owens's writing is so vivid, you can practically feel the marsh mud squishing between your toes.
She really has a way with words, that lyrical, almost poetic style.
It's gorgeous. Like, check out this line. Swamp water is still and dark, having swallowed the light in its muddy throat.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But not everyone was totally in love with the writing style.
Right, some readers found it a bit too flowery, maybe.
One even called it overwrought prose, said it felt like Owens was trying too hard to be, like, epic.
Interesting. I mean, there's definitely a richness to the language, but I can see how it might not be for everyone.
Right, it's a stylistic choice that some readers really connected with and others didn't.
Tastes differ. But that actually leads into something that was a much bigger point of debate around the book, the whole dialect thing.
Dialect. Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, Owens got some criticism for how she uses Southern dialect, specifically that it seemed like only the, less savory characters.
The bad guys, you mean?
Right, exactly. Like they were the only ones who spoke with a really strong accent.
So, like, she was using dialect as a shorthand for, like, who was good and who was bad.
It's a valid critique, I think.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about, authorial responsibility and all that.
Especially when you're dealing with a specific region and culture.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated because then you have reviewers who went deep into the accuracy of the dialects themselves.
Oh, wow. Like linguists or something?
Well, maybe not linguists, but definitely some folks who knew their stuff. One reviewer even called out specific inaccuracies with, like, the way people speak in Asheville versus the Outer Banks.
Whoa. Someone really did their homework.
They did. And it raises all sorts of interesting questions about how much research is enough when you're trying to represent a place and its people authentically.
That's a good point. It's a delicate balance for sure.
For sure.
And speaking of things that spark debate, there's also the whole issue of Kaya's ability to, well, survive all on her own.
Ah, yes, that age-old question of plausibility.
Right. We have reviewers who are like, how could a 6-year-old realistically manage to, shop for food, cook, all that?
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from. It's definitely a challenging environment, especially for a child.
It is, but then on the other hand, you have readers who are totally inspired by Kaya's resilience.
Right. It's almost like a testament to the human spirit, the ability to overcome incredible odds.
Makes you wonder what's more important, sticking to strict realism or capturing that emotional truth.
That's a question worth pondering, for sure.
It is. So, ready to delve into the mystery itself.
Always down for a good mystery. What happens when the town's golden boy, Chase Andrews, turns up dead? And Kaya, the Marsh Girl, becomes the prime suspect.
Classic setup. The outsider, the one who doesn't quite fit in, becomes the scapegoat.
Exactly. And it forces us to confront those, societal prejudices, those snap judgments we make about people who are different.
Yeah, and to question whether those judgments are based on evidence or just plain fear.
Ooh, getting deep. I like it.
Well, this book definitely goes there. But without giving too much away, let's just say the reviewers had some mixed feelings about the mystery itself.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, some found it kind of predictable.
I can see that. It's a well-worn trope, right?
It is, yeah. But then others were completely hooked, kept guessing until the very end.
And some even talked about a stunning revelation that totally blew their minds.
I know, right? So clearly, Owens managed to keep some readers on the edge of their seats.
So suspenseful, even if the overall setup was maybe a bit familiar.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about all of this in light of Owen's background.
Her background as a wildlife scientist. You mean how all those years studying animal behavior, observing nature, somehow seeped into her writing?
Yeah, like how did that shape her approach to crafting this story, to creating Kaya's world?
It's fascinating to think about. Like, did she see parallels between the natural world and, human society? Did those observations inform the way she approached characters' relationships?
That's a great question. It makes you wonder what prompted her to make this leap from like scientific writing to fiction.
Right. What stories was she burning to tell?
And how did her unique perspective, that scientific lens, influence the way those stories unfolded?
So many layers to uncover here.
There are, yeah. This book is definitely full of surprises. So before we dive even deeper into where the crawdads sing, let's take a moment to just kind of absorb all these initial thoughts.
Yeah, let it all sink in a bit.
What's standing out to you so far? What are you curious about?
It's amazing how Owens uses the natural world as a mirror for Kaya's journey. I mean, specifically the marsh. It's not just a setting. It really reflects her growth and struggles and all that.
There's this one passage, I just love it. She describes the waves crashing on the shore as energy searching for a beachhead, which is such a cool image, but it also feels like it's talking about Kaya. You know?
Yeah, totally. Kaya's searching for belonging, for a place to land, just like those waves.
Exactly. And then there's that other line, it's so powerful, where Owens writes, most of what she knew, she'd learned from the wild. Nature had nurtured, tutored, and protected her when no one else would.
Wow, yeah, that's heavy.
Mm.
It really shows how the marsh is like more than just a place. It's like her source of strength.
Totally. And it makes you think about Owen's background, right? Like as a wildlife scientist, she must have seen those same qualities in nature, resilience, adaptability.
For sure. I mean, she spent years observing how animals survive in like the toughest conditions.
Yeah.
It makes sense that those observations would make their way into her writing.
Absolutely. But there was one reviewer who brought up an interesting point. They called Kaya a manic pixie dream girl in a marsh.
Manic pixie dream girl. Now, that's a term I haven't heard in a while.
Right. It's like that trope where you have this quirky, free-spirited female character who basically just exists to teach a male character about life.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. So they're saying Kaya fits that mold.
Well, there are definitely some elements of that, especially early on. But I think Owens does a lot more with Kaya's character. She doesn't shy away from the hard stuff, the emotional toll of everything she goes through.
Right, like the abandonment, the prejudice, the loneliness. It's all there.
And it's raw. It's not just some romanticized version of a nature girl living a carefree life.
There's depth, definitely. Like, remember that scene where she's a little girl sitting on the beach watching the gulls, and she's so scared they'll abandon her too?
Oh, man, that scene gets me every time.
It's so heartbreaking. But it also shows how, like, beneath that tough exterior, there's this deep fear of being alone.
Exactly. And all of that complexity is what makes her such a fascinating character to me.
Totally agree. And then you throw the whole murder mystery into the mix.
Oh, yeah, Chase Andrews. We keep mentioning him, but we haven't really talked about him that much.
So, who was he, really? Aside from being the town's golden boy, who ends up dead.
It's interesting. The reviewers had some pretty different takes on him.
Really? Like, how so?
Well, some saw him as a total stereotype, like
Yeah.
the privileged jock who takes advantage of Kaya.
Classic villain material.
Right. But then others felt like there was more to him, like Owens was hinting at some hidden depth or something.
Interesting. So kind of leaving it up to the reader to decide what to make of him.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same with the mystery itself. Like, some reviewers felt like they had it figured out right away.
Mystery solved. No problem.
Right. But then others were totally surprised by the twists and turns. Some even talked about this stunning revelation that changed everything.
Wow. A real game changer, huh?
It sounds like it. So even if some readers guessed the ending, Owen still managed to keep things interesting.
Right. The journey is just as important as the destination, right?
It is, yeah. But for me, what makes the mystery so compelling is that it really exposes all the prejudices within the community.
Yeah, that's what gets me too. Like, Kaya, she's already this outsider, and then when this murder happens...
She instantly becomes the suspect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It forces you to think about, like, are we, as readers, doing the same thing? Are we judging her based on what we think we know, or are we actually looking at the evidence?
Oh, that's good. It's like we're all on trial in a way.
Right. Challenging our own biases and assumptions.
And speaking of biases, there's also that element of, like, Kaya not having a formal education, being isolated from the world, It makes her even more vulnerable in the eyes of the law.
Oh, absolutely. She doesn't have the tools to navigate that system to defend herself in the same way that someone else might.
It's like she's speaking a different language almost.
Yeah, and one reviewer even pointed out this irony, like Kaya spends her whole life observing the natural world, right?
Right, learning its laws.
Exactly. But then she's thrown into this human system, this legal system that feels totally foreign and unfair.
It's such a stark contrast, isn't it? Like nature's harsh, but it also has its own kind of justice, you know? It's all about balance.
Yeah, there's an order to it, even in the chaos.
But the human world, the legal system, it can feel so arbitrary, especially for someone like Kaya.
It's like she's caught between these two worlds, the world of the marsh, where she's free, and then this world of human society, where she's constantly being judged.
In the courtroom, that's where those two worlds collide.
Head on. And it's not pretty.
It's not. But then Owens throws in this retired lawyer who decides to take on Kaya's case, you know?
Oh, yeah, I remember him. Reviewers love that character.
They did. It's like this little glimmer of hope in this otherwise bleak situation.
It is, yeah. Like a reminder that even in the most cynical environments, there's still room for compassion, you know?
Totally. It's like Owens is saying, hey, look, not everyone is going to write Kaya off.
There are people who see her, who believe in her, even when it seems like the whole world is against her.
Right, and it kind of sets up this classic David and Goliath scenario, you know?
I love those. The underdog fighting against the system.
It's so satisfying, and it makes you root for Kaya even more.
For sure.
Yeah.
You want to see her triumph over all the people who underestimated her, who misjudged her.
Exactly. But speaking of things that maybe didn't quite hit the mark, what did you make of the courtroom scenes themselves?
Oh, you mean how some reviewers found them kind of tedious?
Yeah. Like some called them quite competent, but others were like, ugh, get on with it already.
It's funny how something like that can be so divisive, you know? Like, for some people, the legal stuff is fascinating. They love all the details.
I get that. It's like a puzzle to solve.
Exactly. But then for others, it's just a distraction from the main story, you know?
Right? They just want to get back to Kaya and the marsh and all that.
It's a good reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to storytelling, I guess.
Totally. Different strokes for different folks, right?
Exactly. And that brings us back to the characters. Because even if the plot or certain scenes didn't work for everyone...
It's the characters that stay with you.
Oh, for sure. Kaya especially. I mean, several reviewers mentioned being moved to tears by her story.
I'm not surprised. Owens really goes there with the emotions, you know?
She does. Loss, abandonment, the longing for connection. It's all so raw and real.
It's like, even though Kaya's life is so unique, so specific to that time and place...
There's something universal about her experiences. You know?
Totally. We've all felt those things, that need to belong, the fear of being alone.
It's what makes her stories so powerful, so relatable, even if we've never lived in a marsh or been accused of murder.
Right. Speaking of relatable, did you pick up on the whole Southern food thing?
The food, oh yeah, all those descriptions of grits and black-eyed peas.
It was a lot. Some reviewers loved it, said it added to the atmosphere, you know?
Yeah, like you could practically smell those dishes.
Exactly, but then others were like, enough already.
Ad nauseum, one reviewer said.
I know, right? It's funny how even something like food can be so polarizing.
It is. But it just shows how every reader brings their own baggage to a book, you know?
Yeah.
What works for one person might totally turn off another.
That's so true. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to these things.
And that's what makes these conversations so interesting, right? Hearing all the different perspectives.
Exactly. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. If you were Kaya, facing all that suspicion and judgment from your community, would you fight to clear your name, or would you just disappear back into the marsh?
Ooh, that's a good one. Would you risk more heartbreak by engaging with a world that's already hurt you so much?
Or would you choose the safety of isolation, even if it meant sacrificing justice?
Tough choice. And it really gets at the heart of Kaya's dilemma, you know?
It does, and it's something we'll continue to unpack as we move into the final part of our deep dive, where we'll tackle the ending, the controversies surrounding Delia Owens herself, and the enduring legacy of this book. We've talked about Kaya finding refuge in the marsh, but one reviewer had this interesting take. They called it a kind of prison.
A prison. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, she's safe there, away from all the judgment and the rules of society.
Right, but that isolation, it comes at a price, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, like she's cut off from real connection with other people.
Exactly. So it's this weird duality, right? The marsh, it nurtures her, but it also keeps her trapped in a way.
It's like that push and pull we all feel, right?
Hmm.
Wanting to belong, but also needing to be free.
Totally. And speaking of that push and pull, it makes me think about Delia Owens' own journey,
Yeah.
going from wildlife scientist to
Oh,
novelist.
yeah, that's a big leap. What made her switch gears like that?
Right. Like, what stories was she carrying around inside her all those years out in the field?
And did her scientific background, did that influence the way she writes, the way she tells the story?
One reviewer actually called her writing style poetic. They were really impressed by the imagery and the rhythm of her language.
That's cool. So it's like she's taking that scientific eye for detail, that precision, and applying it to something totally different.
Exactly. But I do have to say, not everyone was a fan of that approach.
Oh, really?
Right.
What were they saying?
Well, some felt like the focus on nature, on survival, it kind of overshadowed the human element of the story?
Interesting. So like they wanted more character development, more focus on the relationships, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and they felt like Owen's scientific background maybe got in the way of that a little.
I see their point.
Hmm.
I guess it just goes to show you can't please everyone.
Right. What resonates with one reader might not do it for another.
Exactly. And speaking of resonance, where the Crawdads sing really hit a nerve with a lot of people, right?
It did, yeah. It was a huge bestseller, sparked so many conversations.
And then there was that movie adaptation.
Oh, yeah, everyone was talking about that.
So it definitely struck a chord, for better or for worse. But we also have to talk about the elephant in the room.
The controversy surrounding Delia Owens.
Yeah, exactly. Those allegations stemming from her time in Zambia.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Like, can you separate the art from the artist?
Right. Do we have to?
Yeah.
Should we? I don't know. It's a conversation we need to have, even if it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And look, our goal here isn't to tell you what to think,
Yeah,
but just to present all the information, all the different perspectives.
Right. So you can make up your own mind.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how complex this book is, how it sparks these really important conversations.
About nature, about justice, about what it means to be human.
Totally. And that's what makes it such a powerful story, even if it's not perfect, even if it leaves you with more questions than answers.
It sticks with you. It makes you think.
It does.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Where the Crawdads Sing, I want to leave you with one final thought. If you strip away the mystery, the romance, even those beautiful descriptions of the marsh, what's left at the heart of this story?
What's the core message? What's the thing that stays with you long after you close the book?
That's the question I want you to wrestle with. And maybe there's no easy answer. Maybe it's different for everyone.
That's the beauty of it, right? It's a story that keeps on giving.
It does. So keep those conversations going, revisit the book, check out those reviews, and keep exploring. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.